Hello and welcome to the Celtic Way. It's a very special podcast edition of the Celtic Way. As you can see at the top, it's a Celtic Bayern Munich preview, and I'm interviewing international renowned football commentator Derek Rae, who specialises in not only Scottish football but football around the world, which specialises in German football as well. And for me, this is a bit of a treat because this guy is a legend of the game, of the commentary game. And I'm going to let you into a quick story before Derek says hello. I did commentary for Hamilton Academical for a season on the Hamilton Academical TV. And I asked this man for a couple of pointers. And he sent me what I can only describe as a tutorial. And it became my Bible. And every time I commentated for Hamilton Academical. So I wanted to personally thank you for that, Derek, and introduce you to everybody. Derek Rae, everybody. So I'm going to give you
I'm not used to introductions like that, Tony, but thank you very much. I'm glad the commentary all went well when you did it, and I was happy to pass on those ideas. And yeah, looking forward to the next few days. And I know Celtic fans are really looking forward to these games against Bayern. They should be cracking.
Great news this morning for the Celtic fans, Derek, they can actually travel to the Allianz Arena. You'll have been there many times. It's a special place, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a nice stadium to watch a game from. It's just to the north of the Munich city centre, easy to get to by local public transport. And one of the things I really like about it is, and I do this whenever I commentate from the Allianz Arena, is get off at the U-Bahn station. You know, the U-Bahn is what takes you to Frödmanning. You get off at Frödmanning, and then you see this huge spaceship in the distance. And the spaceship is the football stadium. And yeah, it's Bayern's home these days. They used to play at the old Olympiastadion, but Bayern now synonymous with that arena. And yeah, I think Celtic fans will have a great time there.
I'm going to ask you to tell everybody, Derek, your love and your passion is Scottish football, but I think next to that love, or a joint love, is your passion for German football. Can you tell everybody why German football?
Yeah, it goes back a long, long way. I'm from Aberdeen originally. Don't hold that against me, but I'm from Aberdeen. And my favourite subject at school was always German. Picked it up very young. And we had the advantage, I go back a little bit. So we had the advantage in those days before internet of having a radio signal that you could pick up basically going across the North Sea from northern Germany to Aberdeen. So I would use this to enhance my German knowledge, and quickly found out as a young German student that you could pick up the Bundesliga broadcasts on the radio in German, of course. And so this was a great treat for me as somebody who was embracing the language to get to hear these Bundesliga commentaries at a young age. It was my own little secret, in a sense, my own little secret world that I lived that nobody else really knew much about. And then took it forwards, and while I was at school, developed a relationship with another school in Germany, which was actually right on the border of the two Germanys, as was the case back then, West and East. It was due to the teacher I had, Brian Steele, who was a big influence on me at that point. And would go to Germany quite a lot as a student, studied it at university, and always kept the language up. And often wondered, I was a commentator obviously in Scotland for many years, first in two different spells as a young commentator back in the 80s and 90s, and then went away, primarily based in the USA for a long time, came back when ESPN UK was on the scene, 2010, and then BT Sport. And then I left that position in 2017. But I always wanted to work with German. It never really came my way until ESPN UK. They had the Bundesliga rights as well as the Scottish football rights. So that was sort of what I would do, dovetailing between the two countries. And since 2017, my main focus has been the Bundesliga. I commentate every week for ESPN, American broadcaster on the Bundesliga, and also for the Bundesliga's own world feed. So it's a bit of a long story, but I spend a big chunk of my time talking to you from the great city of Cologne today, and that's where I spend a big chunk of my time.
I think it's a wonderful story, which is why I got you to repeat it. And also, you will hear when Derek pronounces his German teams and German locations, it's the exact pronunciation. I believe some Twitter warriors have even tried to dig you up and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
Social media, isn't it?
It's a bit polarizing, but I just always sort of feel that if you can say a name properly, you should. It's respect, and
Yes.
I think we like that as Scots. We get annoyed as Scots if somebody, we have a name that somebody just completely butchers in another country, and I think we're pleasantly surprised if somebody actually knows our pronunciation. If somebody called you Haggerty or something, you probably correct them. So that's something that I bring with me, and I do try very much in the Bundesliga broadcast to make it sound, like Germany, because and I did this actually with Scottish football as well. I was a big believer that every Scottish football club had its own story that was unique to that football club. And, we were in Scotland. So let us make it sound like Scotland and not just a bland facsimile of football in country X or country Y.
Brilliant. Can I ask you, Derek, and give me some hope here? Celtic versus Bayern, the playoff round of the Champions League. Celtic, I would say they're up against it. That's formidable opposition, isn't it? Let's be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I think every Celtic fan would say that. And, it goes that way when you play a team like Bayern, whose ambitions are different in the Champions League. I think Celtic these days go into every Champions League competition, and it's a new format now, hoping to get out of the initial phase. It's a league phase now. Celtic have done that. So I think to a large extent, and you would be able to say more articulately than I think to a large extent it's job done for Celtic already. I mean, everything now is a bonus, having got to the stage of the competition. But that doesn't mean that you don't have the belief that Bayern can't be taken care of over two matches. With Bayern, obviously, they go into every Champions League season believing that they can win it, and this season it's even more resonant. And I say that because the final will be in Munich. So you'll hear Celtic fans who go to Munich, if you get into conversations with Bayern fans, they will talk about das Finale daheim, which basically means the final at home in Bavarian. And, hosting the Champions League final carries with it that responsibility. They remember that season, 2012, when they were favourites to beat Chelsea at home in the final. Somehow, and I was at that final, somehow contrived to not win it. They were the better team, but they didn't win it. And so there is pressure. And, when you're a Bayern player or a Bayern coach, you expect to win the Bundesliga every season, maybe a bit like Celtic nowadays and Scottish League terms. You expect to win the league. Didn't happen for Bayern last season. Leverkusen were that bit better. They were tremendous. I think every Bayern fan would acknowledge that. And they've also had a problem, Bayern, in the German Cup in the last few seasons. They have not been able to get past a certain stage, going back to 2020, and were knocked out by Leverkusen this season. So, what I'm saying is, the Bundesliga is really important. The Champions League is also important. It's sort of the cherry on the top for Bayern. And, they go into these games with Celtic. It's been interesting to listen to everybody connected with Bayern. I think on the one hand, and this is probably just, fair, they see Celtic as the team they wanted to draw, in terms of they didn't really want to play Manchester City. I think it would be fair to say. But on the other hand, there is fierce respect for Celtic, and the coach, Vincent Kompany, has said himself, he said this is potentially a difficult opponent and a special place. And he knows about it, having been there with Manchester City. He knows about Celtic Park. Every German fan knows about Celtic Park. And I think they secretly want to go there. Maybe not so secretly. They openly want to go there and experience it, and be able to say, yeah, I was there at what is a special place. So I think it's probably a little bit like if Celtic were playing against a team like Aberdeen or Dundee United in a big cup tie, you would expect it to beat those teams. Bayern will expect to beat Celtic, but I don't think they expect any sort of cakewalk, and they'll be ready for maybe one or two complications along the way.
Celtic have played two German teams in the league phase. The Jekyll and Hyde nature of Celtic. We saw the drubbing in Dortmund, 7-1, but they licked their wounds and they performed admirably after that with the kind of campaign high, the home leg against RB Leipzig, Derek. So it shows you what can be achieved, and they've done well to bounce back and, as you say, get to the playoff round. And it is job done, because that would have been one of the goalposts that they had this season. Get there. I know they're trying to shift it, but playing Bayern is just different gravy altogether. But, Celtic have shown that they can play in this competition, belong in this competition, but they've also shown that vulnerability as well in Dortmund.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that game against Leipzig, because I'm positive that all the Bayern coaching staff and all the analysts will have been researching that game. And, Celtic fully deserved to beat Leipzig. No two ways about it. Watched it myself. And they were just better in every way, and had command of that game, took the game to Leipzig after, early on it seemed to be going Leipzig's way, but not for very long. So I think that will be something that'll be important for the Bayern players to look at, because they know Leipzig, they know that they can be a threat on a given day or night in German football. And for Celtic to have won that game as convincingly as they did, that speaks to the fact that there is quality there. And Dortmund was one-off. I didn't really see that coming, to be honest. Dortmund can be very funny. They can be a strange team. They can scale the heights. They can plumb the depths. They chose to scale the heights that night. But, in this league phase, you can brush that off, as Celtic, as you rightly said, did. And, deservedly in this phase of the competition now.
What has Vincent Kompany did to Bayern that's different maybe from past Bayern managers, Derek?
Yeah.
What kind of style will Celtic see?
Great question. Yeah, really good question. Because if this had been the Thomas Tuchel era, we'd have been talking about, I would say, a more pragmatic sort of Bayern. And it wasn't a Bayern that particularly pleased the home fans. Bayern had this tradition, and the old timers at Bayern would always say, we have a responsibility to win trophies, but we have a responsibility to win trophies playing in a spectacular fashion. I think there probably are some similarities with Celtic. I'm old enough to remember, when I first went to Celtic games, there was always the talk about how, Celtic European Cup winners, 1967. We don't just grind out championships and victories. We do it with a certain flair. Back then, when I was young, Rangers were more the team that might grind it out. Celtic played with a certain elan, so to speak. Bayern are very much like that. So with Tuchel, it was always a slightly uneasy kind of coexistence, and probably was the right move for all parties to move on. So Kompany has come in, and he was an interesting choice because he was the Burnley manager, got relegated with Burnley. I spoke to a lot of people in English football who said, I'm not sure this is the right choice. They're taking a big risk here. But I think they did their homework, and they saw somebody who did have a vision for playing this sort of spectacular football. Now, what do I mean by spectacular football? Well, it's a very high line. I think that's the one thing that you see with Bayern. It's got a little bit lower since the crazy days of the first few weeks of the season. And I think there's some pragmatism built into that, that they've tried to temper the style somewhat. But what he wants to do is play, I would call it sort of very eye-catching, almost wild football at times. And, I suppose you can understand why, because if you look at the team, look at the strength of the team, you've got players like Jamal Musiala, who is one of the best players in the world, even at this stage in his career. And the sky is the limit for him. And he's a threat to anybody he plays against. You've got people in the squad like Kingsley Coman, who can do untold damage. Michael Olise, who's come in this season and done really well. Somebody like Leroy Sané is no longer a first choice, but can start games. And you've got an English fellow by the name of Kane, who,
we know him.
And he knows where the goal is. And he has been a really good fit. For my money, he's been a good signing, good use of their money, a lot of money, and many at the time said too much money. But I think they recognized they needed somebody in the mold of Robert Lewandowski. After he left, they didn't have a proper striker. So that became the priority. And, 55 goals in 50 Bundesliga games. That's, something nobody else has done. So, I think that's where the strength of the team is. The big problem is that defensively, I'm not going to say there are holes, because I don't think Bayern have holes defensively, but I think there's a softness which comes from the way they play, which gives opponents hope. So with this high line, you have the two main central defenders, Dayot Upamecano and Min-jae Kim. They're both good defenders. They're both high-level defenders. But there are sometimes breakdowns. And the teams who have, for me, had most success against Bayern are the teams who understand how to take advantage of that. And that means with strikers who play just off the shoulder, sometimes around the halfway line, can time their runs, get in behind Upamecano and Kim. And, I'm thinking of Frankfurt, for example, commentated on their game with Bayern back in the autumn. And that finished 3-3. And they had another fellow who, of course, his name has now popped up in British football, Omar Marmoush, leading the line. Right. And he really took advantage of negligence, I would say, by Bayern. And we've seen that in a few of their games. I covered them against Mainz in December. Same thing happened really that day. They were outdone by a weaker team in technical terms, but a team that maybe got the tactics spot on. So I would say if the Celtic analysts are listening, dig out that game against Mainz back in December, because you'll see how a team like Mainz, fairly limited team, good team in the upper half of the Bundesliga table, but a team like that can take advantage of Bayern when they have a bad day. So that's, I think, how it's done, is knowing that Bayern will have possession. They've got these flair players. They can demolish teams, and I tend to think that the worst recipe or the least useful recipe against Bayern is to be ultra defensive. You can try and be really compact. I'm talking about Bayern and the current guys. You can be really compact and sit very deep, but usually they'll find a way to take advantage of that. I think it's the teams who have that little bit of devilment about them in terms of their attacking tactics. They obviously are going to sit deep at times, but if it's just sitting deep and not figuring out a plan to exploit what can be a bit of a wobbly defensive setup, because Joshua Kimmich has to drop back and sort of become the third central defender at times when it gets overly high. If you have your tactics worked out there, that's maybe where some damage can be done.
With the suspension of Dyson Maeda, Derek, Celtic's handle before, so it'll probably be Jota and Nicholas Kuhn on either side.
Yeah,
with Adam Idah up top. Now, Adam Idah scored a couple of good striker goals against Aston Villa, but that was because the service was there. It will be all about service from the wide areas for Celtic, wouldn't it? And Jota coming back's giving him a big lift. But Dyson Maedah's pace, as you said, getting in behind, that's probably something they could have done with, certainly for the home leg, maybe use it to their advantage in the away leg as well as his defensive stuff. But that's where Celtic can get a bit of joy with those players up front. But as you say, they'll need to combat the threat coming forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That is the problem with Bayern. It can be a different player on any particular day or night who can do the damage. So you think, okay, we've got Musiala in check here, but then Coman has the game of his life, or Olise, or Kane. The problem with Kane is that sometimes, and I notice this in commentating, sometimes we forget about Harry Kane for 50 minutes, and then all of a sudden, before you know it, he scored 2 goals. He scored 2 goals just like that. And, so there's a danger there. And, he takes the perfect penalty. He hasn't missed a Bayern penalty at all. I don't think I've seen a better penalty taker than Harry Kane in recent times anyway. So, yeah, I mean, you need an element of luck as well. You have to have things go your way over the course of 2 games. But I think in a funny kind of way, I don't know if you agree with me on this one, Tony, I actually think it's better, and this goes against conventional wisdom, I think it's better to have the home leg first, because I think it gives you a sort of a fighting chance to get the crowd right into it, make Bayern feel a bit uncomfortable. I don't think that will worry them too much because, here in Germany, the atmosphere is pretty hot at most venues as well. But, Celtic Park can take it up to an even higher level on a big night like this. And so I think for Celtic to have that home leg, I'd have been worried about the away leg and maybe falling behind early on, and then it's sort of over as a contest. But I think being at home first does help.
I think in this situation it does, because I think Celtic's task will be to keep it alive for the second leg, and hopefully, if they can, have any kind of league to take to Germany. If they produce a kind of RB Leipzig performance, which, they're capable of. And as you say, things have to fall for you for Bayern maybe to have that kind of off night as well. But I think certainly the thinking will be to keep it alive, because I think after Dortmund, they were bruised by Dortmund. but they recovered very well from that. They went to Atalanta and Bergamo and they got a 0-0 drawn, playing a totally different way. But you also spoke to one of my colleagues, Ryan, about Arne Engels, who signed from Augsburg for £11 million in the summer. I'm sure you've been tracking his development and seeing what he's producing. He's starting to hit a rich vein of form. And I think it's a stage like Wednesday night, which you turn around to Arne and say, okay, you're familiar with these players as well, so go and pick your wits against them.
Yeah, Arne Engels is an interesting one because I covered his very first game in the Bundesliga, which happened to be at the cauldron that is Dortmund. So that was where he got his start. And it was he sort of come from, I'm not going to say from nowhere, but I remember I was working with Hannes Wolf that day, who works for the German FA as one of the coaches at youth level. And he knew all about Arne Engels. He'd identified him. He said, good footballer. He said, I'm interested that they've thrown him right in. So, that was his baptism, if you like, with Augsburg playing in Dortmund. And now here he is playing against Bayern. He's faced them before, so he'll be able to pass on a few things, I'm sure, to his teammates. And I think it was probably the next logical step for somebody like Engels, because Augsburg are a stepping stone club. They're a club that I think in the last few years you would say has done quite well in terms of identifying talent and then selling them on. And they obviously did that at a substantial profit when they sold him on to Celtic. And for his part, he gets something in Glasgow that wasn't going to be getting in Augsburg, Champions League football. So it takes him to the next level. And talking to a few people in the coaching world here in Germany about him, the feeling was that, he was probably initially best suited to being more of a sitting player, to being a defensive midfield player, not your sort of maybe classically English or Scottish defensive midfield player, not a robust destroyer, but somebody with technical ability who can link the play, who can play in the tight spaces. But that sort of player, of course, is always good as a more versatile, again, to use the German terms, like a number 8 rather than a number 6. Number 6 being the defensive midfielder, number 8 being more of a kind of a box-to-box type. And it seems that at Celtic, he's been spreading his wings a little bit.
Yeah. And Nicholas Kuhn as well. There's lots of talk, or there's some talk that his ambition is to play for his country and get that German national cap. Have you seen enough of him to say that's possible in the immediate future, or do you still think he has a bit to go?
I think he probably has. I think he should have the ambition, certainly. And Julian Nagelsmann has shown, as coach of Germany, that he's prepared to sort of go the path less well-travelled in terms of some of the players he's given caps to. There's a guy, Tim Kleindienst, who's leading the line for Germany now, who was playing for a very unfashionable Heidenheim until the summer. He's now at Borussia Mönchengladbach and doing very well, but 29 making his debut. So it's always possible. I think it probably would be hard. While he's a Celtic player, it shouldn't be that way. But I think that there aren't that many players who play overseas who get into the national team who are not with an English club or Real Madrid, teams like that. It's not to say it's impossible, and Nagelsmann does have an open mind. But I thought it was very interesting on the night of the Leipzig game that you mentioned earlier, Tony. On that particular night, all the headlines, essentially in the German media, they sort of were introducing the German public to Kuhn, which you might find bizarre, but obviously Germany is a country that's pretty rich in talent.
Sure.
And people are not following Scottish football or Turkish football or Belgian football or whatever. If it's not happening in Germany or maybe England or perhaps Italy or Spain, they're not really aware. So he was a very good prospect at a young age, but then went off and decided to follow his own path. And I thought that was quite telling that it was sort of German striker, unknown German striker, or little known German striker undoes German Champions League representatives. So that was pretty fascinating.
I think with countries like that, there's very much a out of sight, out of mind.
Yes.
If you're not playing in the prominent league or plying your trade back home in Germany. And I think that's probably what's happened to Kuhn. He's got lost in that system because, as you say, he was a terrific. He was a prodigy as a kid. He was Bayern Munich. He was at Ajax, and then ended up at Rapid Vienna and maybe lost his way a wee bit. So it's games like this that will propel him back to, or get him back on the path to where he wants to go, isn't it? So it's an interesting development to see how his career progresses.
Yeah, and I do think that he can look at, mention some of these names, some of these players who the current Germany coach Julian Nagelsmann has gone to. Maximilian Mittelstädt is another example, plays for Stuttgart now, but was with Hertha for years, journeyman fullback, who suddenly in his late 20s has morphed into the best player in his position, left back in the Bundesliga. And Julian Nagelsmann said right at the very start, he said form will be the determining factor. So he's gone less on reputation. If you look at previous coaches of Germany, whether it was going back to all the way to Jogi Löw, it was much more about, well, there's a hierarchy here, and even though certain Bayern players are not playing well, we have to pick them, sort of thing. But Nagelsmann has not done that, and he's been a bit outside the box. And as I said, Tim Kleindienst is probably the best example for Kuhn to follow, because again, he was not on the radar of the national team at all 18 months or so ago, and now would be the first choice, and they're on merit. So yeah, it's not impossible for him.
You mentioned him earlier, and I'll bring him up, but Harry Kane, that's an incredible goal scoring record. That's Gerd Muller-esque for those old enough to remember. Would you say 50 goals in 55 games, something like that? Incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, he was the fastest by a mile to 50 Bundesliga goals. And, he is that sort of player. Sometimes even, he'll go a whole game where not much happens, or maybe 2 games, and people start to say, well, what's up with Harry Kane? And then, he scores a hat-trick in the next match. And it's sort of almost like clockwork, the way that happens. He's the one thing that I think I always respected Harry Kane, as a Scot, didn't necessarily always wanted to do well. Certainly when England were playing Scotland, I didn't. But I think my respect for him has really grown since he's joined Bayern, because you can hear all the players, all the experienced pros in there. They really value him, And I think he's a quiet talker. He's a leader without being a sort of a fire and brimstone sort of leader. And he's a very good influence on the younger players, because I think you look at somebody like that, and you see the ultimate professional. You see somebody who is completely dedicated to his task, as he sees it, which is to score goals now for Bayern and to win trophies for Bayern. And I think he wanted that chance to play for a club with whom he could win the Champions League. I think there's no getting away from that. I think maybe partially he wanted a change of scenery. I think he wanted to try something different from a family point of view. And from what I can see, it's been a really good fit on all levels, and the club certainly rates him highly on and off the pitch. He hasn't worked particularly hard on his German. I don't think he ever will, because I don't think that is his priority. I think he's so obsessed with the daily routine of training and being as good as he can be. And there have been one or two people recently who've said, well, he's had a couple of stinkers, but I think that is in the nature of it for a centre forwards. Sometimes you don't get the service. Sometimes it just doesn't happen for you. Sometimes you don't touch the ball enough, which can happen to Harry Kane. But all in all, he's been terrific for Bayern.
You mentioned it as well at the top of the programme, with the final being in the Allianz Arena. That is a pressure. And I remember when Roma reached the final against Liverpool back in '84, there was pressure on them, and they beat Dundee United in the semi-final as well, stuff like that. But that is an added pressure for a team, isn't it? Bayern Munich, as you say, set out to win the Champions League every year anyway. But when the final's in your backyard, there will be an instruction from on high. Don't be a spectator. Be a participant in that. That'll be their MO this year, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's been a topic, Tony, really since the start of the season. You hear it just every so often, the finale, das Finale daheim. We have this final at home. We've got to try to be there, And everybody knows in the Champions League it's easier said than done, because you can run into one, crazy draw, or, a couple of years ago, really what did Julian Nagelsmann in when he was the coach of Bayern was what happened against Villarreal. A team maybe, certainly not with the tradition of Celtic, but maybe level-wise around Celtic's level, at least Villarreal then, Celtic now, and they beat Bayern. So there's another, example of how it could happen for Celtic. if Villarreal then could beat Bayern, Celtic now could certainly overcome Bayern. But that was the big problem. It was seen as the sort of thing that shouldn't happen to Bayern. So this is where Kompany will have the pressure, and he'll know this. It's fine to win the Bundesliga. That's semi-expected. They certainly would cherish that this season after what happened last time around. But, if somehow Bayern were to go out of the Champions League at Celtic's hands, that could be, terminal for somebody like Kompany. And it's not lost on him that that's the case. The standards are so high, but the margins are fine in this competition. So who's to say what's going to happen?
Okay, I'll put you in the spot. Have Celtic got a chance?
I have to say they have a chance, yeah, because, we all know that in the Champions League, once you get to the knockout stages, it tends to favour the teams with the biggest budgets.
Yeah.
I think that stands to reason. But yeah, they have a chance. And I think in the first leg, we've spoken about it, if they can keep it tight, if they can neutralise Jamal Musiala, if they can keep Kingsley Coman quiet, if they can play their own game and, create one or two problems for Upamecano and Kim and have them flailing a little bit, then, of course, the atmosphere can take over, can make it even harder. So I think that the key for Celtic is to have something from this first leg, whether that's a narrow lead, whether that's even to still be level pegging with Bayern, then they certainly have a chance. I think you'd have to make Bayern favourites. I think when you look up and down the two teams, I'm sure, Brendan Rodgers would say Bayern are the favourites. He'll probably want to convey that message. Bayern are the favourites. We'll happily be the underdogs here, make them the favourites. But do they have a chance? Yes. Is it likely Bayern will go through? Yes. But it's going to be thrilling to watch.
I was going to say that, and obviously you've got your foot in both camps, but you would just love to see Celtic make a good impression of themselves as well, and for the league that they play in, and just make a good account of themselves and show that on the
100%. And the thing I'm looking forward to as well is, and we got a taste of this during the Euros, I'm looking forward to the reception that the Celtic fans are going to get in Munich, because I think it will be very positive. We saw that from Scotland during the Euros. I think we were the most loved group of fans at the Euros. I can say that, having spoken to thousands of Germans who said, "Oh, could you just keep coming back?" So I was talking to a few the other day. I said who are in Munich actually, who said, okay, Celtic now. This should be great fun as well. So I think the back and forth will be good. Celtic fans will have the time of their lives in one of the great cities in the world. If you're going, be sure to enjoy that side of it as well. Don't make it just about the football. It's an absolute treasure trove of a city. Explore it. Not just the centre either. Around the Marienplatz is lovely, but lots of great little neighbourhoods as well. And enjoy a good schnitzel while you're there. Enjoy the beer, of course, which you can't help but do in a city like Munich, and make it a trip to remember.
I'm not looking forward to it because I'm being sent across myself, and I can't wait. It's as I say, it's one of the world famous arenas in football, isn't it? You just know that there are big clubs in the world, and you just know Bayern Munich are one of those clubs. Celtic are obviously one of them too, but you get that feeling of occasion, don't you? A sense of occasion.
It will be a huge occasion. It will have that feel about it. And I know, talking to one of my colleagues in the commentary business who's covering the game for German TV, he was saying this is one he's really looking forward to, because he's never covered a Celtic game before. And just to sort of feel the pulse of it all. And there's great respect in German football for tradition, because one of the things about German football is, here in this country, tradition is valued. The old-time clubs who still draw, capacity crowds every week. I'm covering this weekend Borussia Mönchengladbach and Eintracht Frankfurt, who are, not clubs from a capital city or anything like that. Fairly big city in the case of Frankfurt, but they get 57,000 sold out, hard to get tickets every week. 54,000 in Gladbach, and so I think people see Celtic and they look at Celtic, they look at the strip, they look at the colours, and they feel that tradition as well. And at a time when, and Germans are very big on this, at a time when football is a bit under threat from corporatism, let's just call it that, from some would say plastic influences. I think people look at Celtic, a club like Celtic, and go, that is football. That is a football club. That's what we see ourselves as being part of culturally as well. So, let's hope for a good game. And I will say, Tony, since you're going to be there, I will off air give you the name of my favourite little local for very good food and the best Munich beer. So I will pass that along to you, and it's up to you whether if you have a chance to pay the visit.
No, I'll make sure I do that. Recommendation from yourself. But you mentioned a couple of clubs there, Borussia Mönchengladbach and Eintracht Frankfurt. They're names from a past, but Eintracht Frankfurt recently won in the Europa League against Rangers, funnily enough, but that was the first time that they'd reached a tournament final for a long, long time. But you're right, I think there's that it's one thing that binds German football and, say, Scottish football and British football. It is that sense of tradition, isn't it, with the football,
Yep, there's absolutely no getting away from it. And, here in Germany, people probably hear this term a lot, 50+1, which is a big concept which underpins, for most German fans, what's right about football. Basically, for people who don't know what 50+1 is, essentially protects fan interests within a club, so that, in other words, you can't have a rich oligarch coming in, buying up the club, and then treating it like his toy. So the fans basically are guaranteed to have just a bit more than 50% of the ownership, and that is the model for most of these traditional clubs. And you have, it can also work the other way. You have a club, Schalke, for example, another huge club, get 60,000 plus per game, but they are stuck in the second division with no hope, it seems, of getting out of it. But I was talking to a few Schalke fans the other day, and I just raised the question. I said, just imagine you could have some rich person coming in and buying up the club, and then you'd be guaranteed to compete at the top table of Europe. Would you take that? And they all said, not on your life. We want no part of that, because for us, football is not just about being bankrolled and having somebody paying money to own us. Football is about community. It's about wider extension of community. It's about going to games with our friends, and that can be in the second division or the third division or wherever. For us, it's about Schalke, and rinse and repeat for just about every top traditional club. And Celtic are facing one of them, of course, in Bayern. And I hope everybody gets the chance to just, what I like to do whenever I go to a game involving Bayern or anybody here in Germany is just stop for a few minutes, just stop to think and imagine all the great players who played in Munich. It was a different stadium, obviously, back then, but you'll see, Franz Beckenbauer honoured there, sadly, who passed away a year ago. You'll see all the greats honoured. And you're conscious of the fact that, as with Celtic, 1967 was very special. As with Celtic, you have a very special history in Munich, and our European football would be a lot poorer without the contribution made by, you think about the great Bayern teams down the years, especially in the 1970s, but subsequently.
Yeah, and one of those finals was won at Hampden.
It was,
Saint-Étienne. So, there is that affinity there, isn't there? With kind of Bayern.
1976,
Yeah, 76, yeah. So, indeed. Listen, Derek, I've loved that. I just love the fact that you talk there, and I think you're a bit like me. I'm a bit of an old romantic when it comes to football. You know,
I'm guilty on that front as well.
And a dreamer.
Yeah, well, I think you have to be. I think football is about dreaming, and Celtic fans should dream that maybe they can do it against Bayern. It's about memories, and that's, come what may, these two games, memories will be made. I hope some friendships will be made as well. It's one of the great things about international competition, whether it's national teams or clubs. I love it when I hear that, we went to the game in Munich and we suddenly got talking to a couple of Bayern fans in a bar. We had a great time. We exchanged numbers, and now we're going to meet up somewhere else, And that happens with football. It's the best side of football, It's the side of football that is real, it's raw, it's authentic, and long may that continue.
Listen, I can't thank you enough for coming on to the Celtic Way and giving us your thoughts and previewing Celtic Bayern over two legs. It's going to be awesome. I can't wait for the away leg. I just hope Celtic are still in the tie at that point, Eric. Fingers crossed. But ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll enjoy me and Clark and Derek 40 minutes of absolute gold there. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, sir. I know you from my time in my career, but you've always been very helpful, very knowledgeable, and wonderful with your time. So from me to you, I appreciate that greatly, and thank you for coming on the programme.
Oh, absolute pleasure on my side, Tony. Thank you for having me. Enjoy these 2 games, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon.